There has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michele Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 306. You've seen Cowspiracy. Now build your own vegan curriculum. Hey, my veg your besties, my bestie adjacents. It's Michele. And it's full-on summer. No, I know some of you have been subjected to extreme heat. But in the topic of summer, over the past few summers, more than a few times, I've been asked about a Veg Your Best book group, and I've kind of pretended that I was thinking about it, taking it under consideration, but no, it just really didn't grab me. And when I actually had to explain my thoughts on the subject recently to someone, rather than just refuse to think about it, a few things occurred to me. That's what happens when you start thinking, right? Because I think one of the complicating factors, not to be too ponderous, one of the complicating factors in our society right now that has made thoughtful conversation a freaking minefield is that everyone seems to have their own set of facts. And that, coupled with, a real lack of interest in facts that are inconvenient and annoying, raising my hand here, I hate those too. And that exists in the plant-based and vegan community as well. Where there are humans, there are human brains. And we would deeply prefer to hear information that's not too confronting or challenging or upsetting. Me too. And I do think that as a group, we spend an awful lot of time on new products and on business and on food and animal cruelty and health and environmental damage. But I think many of us could use a little more, am I speaking just for myself? A little more organized intellectual framework to help us organize and evaluate all the facts and figures and marketing and hype that just comes at us constantly in bites and TikToks and Instagram reels in our digital society. So I'm thinking books. I'm thinking reading. I think most every community that does serious thinking together eventually develops some sort of foundation of literature, some kind of canon, if you will. That's sometimes called a set of shared references, but they're not there because everyone agrees with them and they're sacred. But I think there are these shared parts of our literature that give people a common vocabulary, a shared set of arguments and ideas. They mean that when two people sit down and have a conversation and maybe disagree, they're at least trying to talk about the same things. So anyway, thinking about it outside of a vegan lens for a second, people who have never believed a word of the Bible may often benefit from knowing a good deal about it because, for good or ill, much of Western literature and art and law and ethics is in conversation with biblical stories. And in economics, people who think Adam Smith got every single thing wrong still have to engage with his influence and his work that underpins modern economic theories. People who reject Freud's theories entirely often use some or all of his vocabulary on a daily basis. So in any area of study, there are typically a number of very influential books, historically, writers who you kind of need to know. You kind of need to know their thesis, the argument that they made, why that argument was made at the time that they made it, why it hadn't been made before, what the response was. So my thought is that this canon isn't about consensus, and so many of us are really worked up about building consensus. I love consensus. I'm not a argumentative person in general. Well, maybe some people would disagree. But I think having a shared foundation actually helps us make better conversation, more useful and nuanced conversation. So, thinking about our community, the plant-based or vegan or animal welfare world, we talk to each other constantly via podcasts, on Instagram, at dinner tables, at family gatherings where someone is definitely gonna say something, there's somebody's got something to say about. We're often in different conversations without even knowing it. Someone is arguing from an ethical point of view. Someone else is arguing from health. Someone else is arguing from environmental data or business. Someone else is arguing from, a pure love of Earthlings. And we're all using different references, different frameworks, different languages. Sometimes we think we're disagreeing, and actually we just haven't read the same books. And I wanted to do something about that for a little while, but I've resisted the obvious answer, which some people have suggested, a book club. I'm going to be honest, the word book club is kind of cringy to me. But what actually got me thinking about this was a more, a different question. Not what should we all read together, but what does my own personal curriculum look like right now? Do you know this idea of a personal curriculum? It's the idea of lifelong learning and looking for a literature review, looking for foundational texts, looking for things to underpin your lifelong learning on any given subject. Sometimes people do them quarterly, sometimes people do a theme a month, sometimes people do almost like a master's degree or a PhD degree on their own, self-styled, self-designed. And so what does my own personal curriculum look like right now, 5 years plus into this experiment at Veg Your Best? And what have I decided? What have I not been assigned or pressured into, but what if I actually decided that I want to understand better at this point in my vegan practice? And once I started thinking about it that way, this list that I'm going to share with you today started creating itself. And as a reading series, well, that's only because I'd love to invite you, my Veg Your Besties, my listeners, even the people who don't listen to Veg Your Best routinely, but may know of it and may have strong feelings about these topics. And I would love to invite people into this virtual conversation. So what would be the difference between a reading series and a book club? Okay, a distinction without a difference, right? It seems a little different to me, though. But a reading series is me saying, okay, here's some books I think might belong in our canon, in our shared great books, if you will. Here's why I think they might matter. Here's what I got out of them or am getting out of them and where I push back. And this today is an open invitation for you all to tell me what you think I missed, what you disagree with, what you think belongs on this list that I didn't put on it. And we don't need to agree. We do not need to agree at all. But I do think we could really benefit from having some of these texts in common. So wait, what about documentaries? I know you're thinking, Michele, we do have all kinds of shared references. We have Cowspiracy, Earthlings, we have Health Changers, Game Changers, Dominion, and you're not wrong. I would say those films, those videos, those documentaries have been among the most effective tools vegans and plant-based folks have created in the history of veganism. They've reached more people who would never in a million years have picked up a book with the word vegan on the cover. So you can text someone a link and watch it together on Netflix. These documentaries are immediate and visual. You see the animals, and something has tended to move in so many people's minds on the topics. So not just during the course of that documentary, but permanently. So documentaries have probably done more to shift mainstream awareness of all these issues than anything else. So I don't want to underestimate those for a second. But the difference, I think, is a documentary kind of makes the argument in totality for you, leads you really strongly from a variety of visceral, psychological responses to a conclusion. A book demands you to step in and build that argument for yourself with them. You stop, you reread, you push back. If you're like me, you sit with something and go, I don't know, is that true? Something that makes you uncomfortable, and it takes a lot longer than a film. And when someone in your life really challenges you with a lot of thought, counter arguments, inconvenient questions, that documentary hasn't given you all of that. Documentaries typically give you a very strong feeling, and that is very, very effective. That's advertising 101. But books give you more of a framework, and they appeal more to your thought process. And sometimes, and I say this advisedly because I do love these films, and some of them have been criticized for oversimplifying certain issues, especially science, which can give critics something to grab onto and then just poo-poo the whole concept. So when you've really read the arguments, when you've done the reading in books, when you've built that intellectual framework yourself, more has been created. You actually know something. You actually can work with that information in a much more active way. So documentaries have brought a lot of us into this space, but I am wondering if books are how we really stay and grow and get better at this. So am I being just way too long-winded? I am suggesting that reading is a form of activism in this space. And often on social media and in real life, people tell me that they're vegan or plant-based or vegetarian, but they feel defensive. They're apologetic because they don't really feel up for the activism that some members of our community engage in. And I have said that, in my opinion, just living, choosing, practicing a vegan or vegan direction lifestyle is activism. I think it is. And I think we could say that for this project, reading, in this community, it is another form of activism. When you read deeply, when you actually sit with an argument over the course of a chapter and then a book, you are building something useful and important that you will keep that brain of yours. You build the vocabulary to name what you're seeing. You build frameworks to understand what the arguments are around animal welfare and food systems and why it's so polarizing for people who aren't convinced. And I think you gain a greater awareness for how language itself gets used against us, how words like healthy, humane, sustainable, cage-free, those things get deployed to neutralize our concerns rather than address them. And I think with a little more active reading, you become harder to fool, you become more effective in conversation, even if you never go out there and argue with anyone. But you've sharpened your own awareness, your own curiosity, your own problem solving. And I think that's activism, even if it only really informs you and your thoughts and how you go through the world. Now, I totally get that for a lot of us, me too, raising my hand, me too, reading has gotten genuinely harder to take part in. This digital environment we all live in has done something real to our attention spans. There's a neuroscientist I am very interested in named Marianne Wolf. She's written a book, many books, but one book, Reader, Come Home. Reader, Come Home. I love that title. It's exactly about this. And what her research shows is that deep reading, it's not a natural human capacity. It's a learned skill. And it's a circuit we actually build in the brain through practice. And like any brain circuit, it tends to weaken when we stop using it. So Marianne Wolf describes sitting down to reread Henry James, the 19th century author, after years and years of really heavy screen work in her academic field, and finding she could not get through Henry James's novels. The sentences were too long, and her attention span just kept sliding away. And she is a reading scientist. But the good news, and this is the veg your best part, the good news is that circuit can be rebuilt. It doesn't require a dramatic life change. And Marianne Wolf is very clear about that. She says it requires what we always say here at the podcast: notice the obstacles without letting them defeat you. Look for the easy wins. Maybe that means 20 minutes before you look at your phone in the morning, or 5 minutes. Maybe it's one chapter before bed instead of one more scroll. Maybe it's listening to the audiobook on your commute. And I want to say this, listening counts. It's not always my favorite, especially for nonfiction, but listening counts. It is reading, full stop. And maybe it's giving yourself permission not to get through a lot, but to go very slowly, to stop, to reread and redigest a paragraph, to put a book down and actually sit with the idea the author's making for a minute. No heroics, right? We don't believe in heroics here. I think heroics come from working with the skills you do have and working with the time you do have in the life you do have. You just need to be real. So one specific thing that I wanted to ask you to do as you read this summer, which some people do and many, many people don't, is make notes. Not a lot of notes, but I do think it's important, especially with the books we're talking about here, is to flag the things that land for you, the arguments that resonate, the lines you really want to remember, and you can write them down or you can text them to yourselves or email them to yourselves. Some people I know highlight the things they love and agree with in one color, say blue, and they highlight the things that they disagree with or react badly or against in orange, so that they can kind of flip through if they're looking at a physical book. And I do suggest with challenging books, I do suggest a physical book. I do think it's easier to go back, find your spot, reread something that's not landing that well at first. So anyway, I encourage you to take notes on these topics because what you agree with and what you disagree with, where the author has lost you from their point of view, from their argument, this is all really important. They matter. And I think they'll tell you something real about where you actually are in your own thinking if you keep track of those. And I would love it if you would share with me those things. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can share your ideas from the readings with me. But Marianne Wolf also warns that if we lose the ability or the practice of immersing ourselves, exposing ourselves to complex ideas and lengthy sentences, that we lose more than just the literature. she says we start to lose the cognitive patience that we need to cope with complex psychological motives and to view the world from differing perspectives, and hence to develop deep empathy for others who have not seen things from the same point of view. Honestly, if there's one thing our community needs, something it needs to have and to model, I think it's that. Some deep empathy and some deep understanding. So, summer reading series. Ultimately, it's going to be like everything else. It's going to be whatever you decide to make of it. But my thought is that over the next few months, I'm going to work through my personal curriculum, 6 books that I consider pretty foundational to the history and the conversation around veganism today and our relationship with animals. And some I've read before, some I've skimmed, some I'm looking at brand new. Some of them have been on my shelf and I'm reading for the first time. Anyway, each book or maybe 2 will get its own episode from me, my full take, what landed for me, what I argued with, what I resisted, what changed by the end of how I thought about something. And I would love to weave into these episodes your ideas, your voices, because I'm going to be setting up a voicemail line that I want you to use if you're interested, and more on that in just a minute. But a quick preview of the books that I think are going to be on the list. Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. Animal Liberation came out in 1975, I believe, and this is, for many of the other books, it's kind of the origin point. Peter Singer is a philosopher. He published this and essentially created the framework for modern ideas of animal rights and the concept of speciesism. I believe he invented that term, but that's the idea of discrimination based purely on which species you belong to. And I would say basically every other book on this list that I'm looking at on my personal curriculum for now is in some way a conversation with Peter Singer. So, which means if you haven't read it, you're kind of in a conversation that you aren't up to speed on. So, and I include myself in that. I have read some Peter Singer, but I have not sat down and read the book cover to cover. I would say it's not a comfortable read, and maybe that's exactly the point of why I should read it. So another book, which I have read more recently and quite recently and more cover to cover, is by Dr. Melanie Joy, PhD, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. And Melanie Joy gave us the term carnism, the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals and not others. So if Dr. Singer, Peter Singer gives us the ethical argument, Dr. Joy, who was one of the first guests I invited on Veg Your Best, Dr. Melanie Joy gives us the psychological map of why that argument is so hard to land, why people who genuinely love animals, people who love animals much, much, much more than I do, still sit down to eat them without experiencing any real cognitive dissonance. So this is the book I think about most or recommend most when I'm trying to understand and not judge. Understand the people who aren't where I am. Book number 3, I think people will love this book, Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. Came out, I believe, 2009. Jonathan Safran Foer, a very fine novelist who decided to investigate factory farming when he became a father. And he's not a vegan, but he came at this the way a good journalist comes at things, genuine curiosity and without a predetermined conclusion, which is, I think, it is a great method. So the result is a really widely read investigation of the food system, and it's brought conversation to people who would never have picked up a would never have picked up a book with the word vegan on the cover. 4th book, much more provocative, The Sexual Politics of Meat, from the 1990s, maybe actually 1990, by Carol J. Adams. She is an intellect. She is very, very powerful intellect. And this book can be very provocative. Carol J. Adams made a very feminist argument that the objectification of animals and the objectification of women are not separate problems, and that they share a certain logic. And there is a strong academic argument, but it's also one of those books where once you see her point, it's hard to unsee the point. So I'm not telling you you're going to agree with it. I don't know if I completely agree with it. I'm telling you it belongs in a serious reading list, and I want to re-engage with that book, which I haven't in a long time. Another book, Dominion, The Power of Humans and the Suffering of Animals by Matthew Scully. Now, this is interesting to me because Matthew Scully was a speechwriter for George W. Bush. He's a male conservative, a Christian, and he wrote a very passionate argument for animal welfare entirely within that conservative Christian tradition. So none of that postmodern feminist theory or utilitarian theory. These are just his deep religious moral convictions that we're doing something profoundly wrong to animals, and that it's not a left-wing issue or a fringe position. I wanted to reread. I have not read it cover to cover, and I wanted to reread his arguments. But I think it belongs on the list because I think it also proves that the argument does not belong to any particular politics or wing of political ideals. Sixth book on the list, Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat by Hal Herzog. So he's an anthrozoologist, Hal Herzog, who studies the relationship between humans and other animals. And he's also not a vegan, I don't believe. He's also a rigorous examiner of the contradictions and why do we love our dogs and eat pigs? Why do some people go vegan and then go back? Why does our moral thinking about animals collapse under certain social pressures? So I think it's a very, very important book, and I want it on my personal curriculum list. Now, for another area, I will be taking advice on some books that approach veganism, vegetarianism, animal rights from a racial or colonial point of view. And I'm very open to your ideas about that. And it's one of the first things I'd love you guys to weigh in on, if there are books that you think belong in this area on my personal curriculum list. So among them are Afroism, essays on pop culture, feminism, and Black veganism. Another one is Racism as Zoological Witchcraft. Another one, Sister Vegan, Black Female Vegans Speak on Food, Identity, Health, and Society. Another one that's on my list here to look into, Patrice Jones, The Oxen at the Intersection. And Julia Felice Brooke, Veganism of Color, Decentering Whiteness in Human and Non-Human Liberation Centers. So these are just some of the ones on my radar. I'm very, very open to your suggestions on that front. And that's my invitation to have you help me in my personal curriculum here. And maybe you'll join me on some of these. I think what we're going to use is a voicemail line called SpeakPipe. And the link will be in the show notes when this goes out. Obviously, I record these episodes a couple weeks ahead of time, which can sometimes mean things change a lot, but you'll see the links in the show notes. With SpeakPipe, my understanding is you'll be able to leave me an audio message in under a minute right from your phone, and I want to hear what books belong on this list that I didn't include. I'm not saying I will read them right away or discuss them right away, but I will keep them on a list for the continuation of this project. And I really want to hear which of these 6 that we've talked about today you've already read and what you thought. And if you haven't read them recently, I'd like to challenge you to not weigh in on it until you read it again. Because we do change, our thinking changes, and our appreciation or the nuance with which we can handle certain arguments, it changes over time. And I would really just say, please, you can tell me a book that was important to you, but if you're going to give me much detail about it, please let it be a book you've read or reread recently. I would really love that. And if you think a canon, this idea is a terrible idea, you can tell me that. If you have a book from another language, French, Spanish, German, Chinese, Indian, that you think belongs in this conversation that you don't think an English-speaking audience really knows much about, I would love to know. I would love to know about that. And I would love to play some of your messages on the show. So by leaving one, you're giving me permission basically to do that. So I personally promise that I will handle your voice with care. You can also DM me on Instagram at VegYourBest. You can send an email to me. The links are always in the show notes. But I would really like to hear about your points of view and the arguments that have worked and not worked for you. Because I think we all have a personal curriculum, even if we haven't actually been intentional and decided what it is. So we all are, have a default personal curriculum, and yours is probably different than mine, shaped by where you are in your practice, in your tradition, in your family, and what questions are really strong for you right now, what you've already read, what's already on your shelf. But that's exactly the conversation I want to have. I want to have more interaction with you, my Veg Your Besties, and my more casual listeners. And a reminder, I want you to know you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with these books. I don't think we need to agree with each other. The whole point of this is to consider building a shared set of references so that we can, when we do disagree, we can disagree better. We can disagree more effectively, more precisely, more usefully. Very often I find agreement is very easy, and often it's just, okay, guilty again here today. Yeah, okay, I don't want to challenge you or be challenged. But a more productive disagreement, the kind where both people come out thinking more, that's what a real intellectual community looks like. So this is a different episode of Veg Your Best, and maybe some of you are at the end of your... You're like, oh, Michele, that's enough. That's too much. Too geeky. But that's what I'm thinking for my personal curriculum, to include you in on it. 6 books so far, 1 summer. Maybe it'll go into the fall. And there's no mandatory homework. You won't be quizzed. I just wanted to include you in a reading habit that I am recommitting to this summer. 1 chapter at a time at whatever pace. Well, we'll see what it is. Some of these books I think will take a lot more time for me to read than others. So, like I said, make some notes as you go. Please keep track of the arguments and the ideas that do land for you strongly and what doesn't, and what surprises you. And then tell me. The voicemail link will be there, the book list, everything else will be in the show notes, and I'm going to be back with the first book very soon. I cannot wait to hear from you and hear how some of these books will help you veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.